Peter Byrne, and I'm being interviewed because of my background in the Bigfoot mystery, which is many years. I started in the Bigfoot field in 1956 with correspondence with a Texan whose name was Tom Slick, and he was very interested in projecting a full-time research in the Himalaya. I am Irish. I grew up in Ireland, and I was there until I was 18, at which time I joined the British Air Force, Air Sea Rescue, air gunner on a Catalina, and I put in 4 years, most of it in Southeast Asia, in the islands. The war came to an end, and I was discharged with others, and I liked Asia and what I'd seen of it, especially British India of that time. So I decided to try and get back. So I joined a British tea company in London and went back to North Bengal, where I spent 4 years as a tea planter. As soon as I arrived in North Bengal, I realized that it was a hunter's paradise, a naturalist paradise, with tiger everywhere, elephant, rhino. So I had a small background of amateur hunting in Ireland. So I decided to start hunting as an amateur with a view of, down the road, maybe doing it professionally, if that was possible. So I read all the books I could, spent 4 years, and after 4 years, I resigned from my tea company, and with an invitation I had to go into the country of Nepal, I walked into Nepal and set up a big game hunting company, which I ran for 20 years, taking people hunting for everything except rhino and elephant. We hunted tiger, leopard, wild boar, buffalo, bison, crocodiles. So that was my background in big game hunting. Towards the end of that time, I was trekking in the Himalaya, a small expedition to look for the Yeti, and made contact with this Texan called Tom Slick, this oil man. He became a very good friend. And he wanted to do a full-time search for the Yeti in the Himalaya, 3 years. So to make a long story short, I signed up with him. I spent 3 years in the Himalaya looking for the Yeti. When I came down from that, he invited me to come to the States. He said, you spent enough time up there, come to the States and look for Bigfoot. And I have to say, I laughed. I'd never been to the States before. To me, America was skyscrapers and freeways. But I came over here and got into the search for Bigfoot with him. We based up in Northern California, and it lasted for 2 years and 9 months, at which time he died in an air crash and it came to an end. I went back to big game hunting. So that's when I first got into Bigfoot. And that was 1956, 57, 58, 59 was the Yeti, and then Bigfoot, January 1960, starting here. When I was big game hunting, partially in North India, but mostly in southern Nepal, the jungles of southern Nepal, which run for 500 miles east to west, 50 miles north to south. There were elephant everywhere, lots of elephant. We did not shoot elephant. In that part of Asia, the elephant is one of the Hindu gods, a holy animal. Nobody ever shot an elephant. The other animal which was protected was the rhino, which was kind of the preserves of the royal family of Nepal. So those two animals we didn't shoot, but everything else was trophies. My clients would contact me and tell me what they wanted, usually tiger, and then a leopard, and a buffalo, and then a bison, and so on. And I would set up the arrangement before they came, wherever it was going to be, different parts, and then they come, shoot, and get their trophy and take it home. It's called trophy hunting. Elephants are extraordinary in many ways, and one way is how quietly they move at night. You get 10 elephants walk past your camp, you never hear them. Extremely silent. They seldom make any noise of any kind. And in the jungles, walking through light and shade in the jungle trees, sometimes they're hard to see because they're colored. But as I say, we didn't hunt them. We photographed them occasionally, but that was all. Okay, the story of the Yeti hand is this. I think it was the second year of the search for the Yeti, and my brother and I were moving across the Himalaya, and we came into this area where there was a small temple. Pangmochi was the name. And that evening, one of the monks came down from the temple to talk to me, and he surprised me because he spoke Nepalese, which I speak. And I said, "You're a Tibetan, how come you speak Nepalese?" And he said, "I was in the army. I was in the Indian army in India years ago." I said, "Great." And then he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "We're looking for the Yeti." And he surprised me. I nearly fell out of my chair. He said, "We have a hand up in the temple here, a Yeti hand. Would you like to see it?" So we went up there in the dark, and he showed me the hand. And I said, "Can I have it?" He said, "No." I said, "Can I buy it?" He said, "No." I said, "Could I take a finger?" He said, "No." So I cabled Tom Slick, told him about this. He said, "You've got to get something. It's very important. Come and see us in England." So I flew to England and sat down with Tom Slick, Dr. Osmond Hill, head of the London Zoo, a luncheon, Ray Fizzard of the Daily Mail, and a Russian author, a lady whose name I forget. And we talked, and Osmond Hill said, "You've got to get that hand." I said, "I can't. They say disaster will befall the temple." He said, "Could you get maybe your finger?" And I said, "Yes, if I could replace it with something." So he reaches under the luncheon table, brings out this brown paper sack, and drops a human hand on the table. He said, "Take that." Make a long story short again, a month later, I was back at the temple, and again I sat down with this lama, and I said, "I'll make a nice big donation to the temple." So he consulted with the other lamas, and they said, "Yes, you can take one finger." And so I did. I cut it off and took one finger, which eventually we got to London for Osmond Hill to examine. And the summary of his examination was, "It's not a human finger." That's all. He didn't know what it was. So, communication with Texas, Tom Slick, was by cable, sending a runner down to the Indian border, sending a cable out, waiting for a reply, 4 days, 5 days each time. And he cabled me and said, "See if you can get to Calcutta on this date and meet with the Mr. and Mrs. Stewart at the Grand Hotel." So I walked down to the Indian border, 200 miles, got on a train, went to Calcutta, and met with Jimmy Stewart and his wife. The Mr. and Mrs. Stewart turned out to be Jimmy Stewart, the great actor. Met with him and gave him the finger, spent a couple of days there. I went back to Nepal. And then they had a small problem, which was that tourists coming into India, the customs looked at their baggage, and also going out of India. So Gloria put the finger in her lingerie case. They fly to London, they check in at the Dorchester Hotel. The lingerie case is missing. So at the hotel, 2 days later, the concierge calls them from down below and says, "There's a customs man here who wants to see you." So Jimmy says, "Send him up." So this young customs official comes up, sits down with Jimmy and Gloria, and says, "Here's your lingerie case. It got lost temporarily." So they thanked him, and as he was leaving, Gloria said, "By the way, I see it's locked. You didn't open it." And this blushing young British customs official said, "A British customs officer would never open a lady's lingerie case." So they got it to Osmond Hill, And that's the story of what happened after that. So yes, I ran a project, a Bigfoot project, based in the Dalles for about a year. And I put up a Bigfoot center, a trailer at a restaurant, the main purpose of which is to bring people in just to talk, tell us if they had a sighting. So that was the Dalles in northern Oregon for 1 year. Then I moved to Hood River nearby for a year, and then that project came to an end. All kinds of people came into the trailer, sat down, talked. We had some nice exhibits there, serious stuff, plaster casts, that kind of thing. And they got talking, and we got 2 or 3 sightings that were credible out of that, and those are in my book. I recorded them. So that was the purpose of the information center. It worked quite well. Well, certain things I learned as a big game hunter were useful, and one was sign reading on the ground, so that when I got back into bigfooting, we'd see something, I could look at it. I learned tracking and sign reading from a couple of Indian villagers who were very, very good, who would show me a grain of sand on a leaf and tell me what it meant, things like that. So when we found what looked like Bigfoot footprints, I was able to interpret them. And more often than not, they were horse hoof prints or people walking in bare feet, that kind of thing. So it was useful to carry that knowledge over into Bigfooting. In all the years I was Bigfoot hunting, some private hunting on my own, and then 2 big projects. One was 3.5 years with Tom Slick. One in the 90s was 5 years. Lots of money spent, headquarters, equipment, full-time professional. In all that time, only once did I have an experience. There'd been 2 sightings across 2 days, 2 men and 2 men. I heard about it very quickly. Very often we'll hear about a sighting 5 years later. It's no good at all. I heard about this very quickly. They took me to the area where they'd seen this thing twice in 2 days, a Thursday and a Friday. So on a Saturday, I set up a tent, and the area was a clear cut. I set up a tent to spend the night. I was about 6 miles from the nearest road, nobody up there. And it had just got dark, and I was about to pack up for the night and go in my tent when something cracked a stick, a loud crack, out in the darkness on the edge of the clear cut, beyond which there was total blackness, the trees. And then another crack, and then another, and then another. And this is not animals walking on dry brush. This was something breaking big sticks. And it went all around me for 1 hour, from 9 o'clock to about 10 o'clock, and then it stopped. I stayed up all night listening and watching. If I'd had a starlight scope, I would have been able to see into that blackness. But the clearing itself had starlight, so I don't know what or who made that noise. It's very strange, and that may have been an encounter with Bigfoot. When it was seen, it was sitting watching the men working, so it may have been curious. He must have still been around, and that's the only thing in all the years I've been into it. I've seen footprints, about 6 sets of footprints across the years. I've never had a sighting. I've interviewed a large number of very credible people for my 2 books. But myself, that was my only experience that might have been a Bigfoot. We're talking about rocks being thrown. No, I've never had anything thrown at me. Never heard any other sounds. The only other thing is footprints, and 5 sets across the years, which I have found, or which my companions have found, showed to me, which we photographed, and from which we made plaster casts. Am I convinced that the creatures exist? Yes, although perhaps not so many as previously, in that when I started in 1960, every year there'd be a footprint find or a sighting, or every 2 years. And now we're going through long, long periods of 10 years maybe, nothing coming in at all, nothing, right up until the year before last, when we had a sighting by 7 men, which we call the 7-man sighting, which I'll tell you about if you wish. So over the years, the evidence is diminishing. Could it be dying out? It's possible. In the years I spent in Asia, 2 species have disappeared. One was the clouded leopard, completely gone, and the other one was the pygmy hog, the smaller wild boar, completely gone. And now for 25, 30 years, disappeared. So these things, could they be dying out? We don't really know, but it's possible. We are now 2021, so it's 2019. In June, 7 loggers were working a place called the Wilson River Drainage, about 50 miles from here. And they were in a closed area, which is all gated. The public does not get in at all because of liability and insurance. They were working with 2 very loud pieces of machinery. One was pulling logs up a hill, the other was loading them into trucks. Tremendous noise. One of them stops and says, "Who's that walking down the road towards us?" And about 300 yards away, they say a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, was walking down the road in bright sunlight in midday. They all stopped work. None of them had a camera. None of them had a cell phone. These are working loggers. These are not tourists, not hippies on bicycles, down-to-earth loggers with 20 or more years of experience. And nearly all of them quite skeptical about Bigfoot because they never saw anything. So the thing walked up to about 200 yards away, stopped, looked at them, turned and walked away. They said it was 7 feet tall at least, 400 to 450 pounds, enormous, dark brown in color, swinging its arms, walking upright, and when it stopped like this with its hands out, looked at them, turned and walked away. So the sighting is extremely unusual in that the time of the day, the people, we believe these things are nocturnal and lie up during the day. So my theory there is that the noise of the machinery got it up and moving, and it didn't know where the noise is coming from, which happens with wild animals very often. They can't pinpoint sound. And it started moving, saw the loggers, walked away. They call it a 7-man sighting. I got into the area with great difficulty, got permission, went in there, spent a whole day, found some footprints, great big footprints, in a shallow stream bed nearby, and I interviewed 3 of the loggers, one of whom is a personal friend whom I trust. So we call it a 7-man sighting, and it was a great boost to the fact that so little is coming in over the last few years. Over the years, we have 7-man sighting. I have a 5-person sighting, a 4-person sighting across the years. So it goes down, it's in my book, my latest book, and it goes down as being significant. Yes, that is the most significant of all the sightings, which only 1 person or 2 persons. And as I mentioned, in one case, 5 people in a car, another case, 4 people in a car. This is 7 men and 7 veteran loggers. They're not mistaking something, so they knew what they saw. I don't think they were shaken up. They're all tough working loggers. They were standing there with their mouths open. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. That they told me, but they weren't shaken up in any way. They went back to work. Yes, some people who encounter these things are scared by what they see, what they encounter, to where they fumble for a camera, or they walk away. If they're in a car, they stay in the car. It's kind of scary. I talked with a state policeman who saw one at 1:30 in the morning. He walked across a remote road in front of him. He was patrolling, and he said it shocked him, absolutely shocked him. This huge 7-foot creature walking across the road in front of him. So he told me he made a mistake, put his foot on the throttle, went on. He should have stayed there. But he went back next morning with friends. They found footprints. So that was a great sighting, a credible sighting for me, sir. But a lot of people are shocked by this thing. He said to him it was like some monster walking out of the past right in front of him. So you asked me, are they benevolent? Yes and no. In benevolent, they're harmless. We know that. Otherwise, people would be chased, children would be kidnapped. There's absolutely no record. When one of these is encountered, it turns and walks away. Always. No exception. As to what they are, a primate, and very possibly a hominid, rather than a hominoid, rather than an ape, in that they do two things. They walk upright. The only creatures in the world that walk upright are us. And the other thing, which you see in that piece of footage, the 1967 footage we call it, you see whites to the eyes. We human beings have whites to the eyes. Nothing else in the world does. You look at animals, you look at dogs, you look at cows, there's no white seen. We have whites to the eyes, which is visible all the time. This thing seems to have whites to the eyes. That and the fact that it's bipedal, walking upright, suggests a hominid form. We're talking about eye shine. Yes, there was a couple in the Dalles, and they were driving home, and they thought they saw one about 100 yards away standing on a tree. So they turned the car around and put the headlights on it, and they said his eyes were shining with reflection from the headlights. And there's a man and his wife, ran down to his trailer and got a rifle with a scope on it. He wanted to use the scope and put it on his face. He said, yes, the eyes were shining. They were not glowing, but they were shining, and they were not reflecting. With many animals, like with tiger, you shine a big flashlight in the face. The eyes are orange and glowing. That's the big cats. But this thing, no, it's just a shine to the eyes that they reported. Well, they've not been catalogued because scientists will catalog them when they have a body on the table in front of them. They will not accept pictures, not accept footage. Too much can be done with footage these days. I forget the name of the process that you use, but you can take anything, manipulate it, enlarge it, all sorts of things you can do with present day technology. And science will not accept pictures, and that's all we have. We have no physical evidence, we have no bones, we have no hair. People report hair, there is no hair. People report bones, there are no bones. And there's a reason for that, I think. So that's the reason why it has not been classified or catalogued to now. I think we're getting closer to the possibility of a photograph, a good photograph, or footage. Everyone carries a cell phone. You can take pictures with a cell phone. There's that possibility. But discovering one, with a bit of luck, we might find a body that had died of natural causes, and then we would have physical remains, and that would satisfy science. Then they would classify it as a hominid, as this and that, and so on, whatever name they came up with. But as of now, that's where we stand. I got into this in January 1916. I didn't quite believe in it. And then slowly across the years, looking at the evidence, what there was, interviewing people, I became convinced that there were a number of these creatures. Nobody knows how many. 200, 500, nobody knows. Well, there must be more than 2, obviously, for them to reproduce. One scientist said at least 300 for reproduction to continue. And then over the years, I became convinced they were there, but nowadays I think less and less because of the lesser amount of evidence that's coming in the form of footprint finds and actual sightings. The last thing we have is the year before last, the 7-man sighting. Before that, 5 or 6 years, nothing. And I keep in touch with a large group of people, by phone, by email, nothing coming in. And now since June, the year before last, what are we, 2019, again, nothing at all, nothing. I've heard about lights, but not associated with a credible Bigfoot sighting. And the only lights you'll see in the forests in North America here are fireflies, natural lights, You won't see anything else. You might see gas in a swamp, a little bit of gaslight maybe, but otherwise I don't believe that these things show lights or have anything to do with lights of any kind. The question I'm asked is, would I like to see a Bigfoot? Of course I would. I'd love to see one. Time is running out. I'm 96 in August, and I have to be practical. I'd love to see one. But the chances nowadays, with the possibility of them being less in number, and then again from the very beginning, going back to the silly question people ask, where would they hide? The Pacific Northwest is enormous. In Northern California, we have the Six Rivers National Forest, 1 million acres. Here we have the Mount Hood National Forest, 1 million acres. An enormous area, millions of acres, and acres that supply the essentials: food, water, cover, and space. Those 4 things, which we all require, which a wild animal requires. So an enormous area. So at this time, I'm not as active as I used to be. We spent thousands of hours watching areas at night, hiking, looking for footprints, thousands of hours, hundreds of miles. And now there's that possibility. But right now, what I'm down to right now is cameras. And I and an associate here, we have 5 cameras out in an area not far from here. And it's an area where there've been sightings. And we put the cameras out on a geotime basis. In other words, if there's been a sighting there in August, we'll have our cameras there in August. If there's a sighting in September here, we'll have our cameras there. So we have 5 cameras out, and we check them every 2 weeks. We have to hike a little bit because the areas are gated off, closed. But we are getting thousands of pictures of deer, elk, bear, 1 or 2 of mountain lion, lots of small animals, thousands of pictures. The cameras are very good, they're sharp, clear, they take good pictures. That's the limit of what we do right now. That, and watch on the phone, listen to if there's been a sighting. If there's been a sighting in Oregon or Washington, I or my friend will go and investigate it. But we don't drive hundreds of miles to California anymore, or BC, although we did it one time. So, possibility of a sighting is there. But right now we're down to cameras, motion sensor cameras. In the whole history of Bigfoot, there's been one piece of footage, 16 millimeter footage, taken by 2 men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin. Patterson has died, passed away. I met him, interviewed him 6 times before he died. He came across to me as thoroughly credible. His associate, Bob Gimlin, is a man of great integrity, very much admired. He lives in Washington still, and I believe his story of what happened, the whole thing. And then in my 2 projects, we put aside large amounts of money to examine that footage by professionals. And each time, the summary of the examination was, we don't know what it is, but it's a real living creature. So the Patterson footage, I think it's real. It's very short. They were very lucky to come across the thing as they did by accident. So I think it's real, yes. Yes, in the Northwest here, and I've got onto the Federal Aviation Administration about this. There have been a large number of crashes across the years. And some of the crash planes have not been found to this day. One was coming out of Bella Coola, and it had something like 15 servicemen on board, a military plane. It crashed on the way, has not been found. When I lived over in the Hood River Valley on my second project, a plane crashed 2 miles from me, a small plane. It took a year to find it. So we're dealing with an enormous area which the pilots tell me they can't see into it. They fly over it, and it's a carpet of trees. You can't see into it. With instruments, possibility to detect something metal. And then every so often, hikers find a piece of a plane, and it's tracked down, serial numbers are checked, and it's a plane that's been missing for 30 or 40 years. So, huge area, and that's what's happening with plane crashes in this area. So gives an idea of the size of the area. We talk about skepticism in the Bigfoot field. I interview skeptics, I let them talk, and on the whole, I find them to be people who know nothing about it, who don't know reading, they're not interested, they're skeptical. Fine, they can have their skepticism, it's perfectly healthy. People who've done reading about it and little studies are convinced that there might be something there, that it's real, that the whole thing is real from beginning to end. One or two scientists have accepted it across the years, many will not accept it. I've dealt with quite a few of them, and so that's where we stand on skepticism and belief at this time.